Okay. Okay, Francis, I welcome you to this week 12 of cs111, right, e-mentoring session. As for previous weeks, I have been your e-mentor for cs111, and this week I will again be conducting your e-mentoring session. So this week's e-mentoring is basically going to be on file handling. You are able to hear me clearly, right, Francis? Okay. So before we start, I want you to actually share with me something that you know about file handling, or what is the basic idea that you can tell me about file handling, or how would you actually describe file handling in terms of C++? Any idea, Francis? Okay, so okay, you can say that it's a way of collecting files. You're almost there, but if I have to explain what the file handling is actually a method of dealing with how you access data in a file using your C++ program. And so it's more about using your programming skills to access a particular document or file, right? To access the data there, or to retrieve data, to edit data, right? Or to input data there, right? So these are the basic things that you can actually do, or ways you can manipulate a file. And those things, what do you call this? And one of those key methods that we'll be discussing in file handling today is how to retrieve data from a file and how to actually write to a file, right? So first thing is about reading and writing files. So if you look at the presentation there on slide 2, this is something how it reads. To read or write disk file, you use variables, right? So the basic idea of file handling in C++ is that when you are actually getting data or getting something from a particular file, you will actually need something or some variable or some form of data structure to actually store whatever you are retrieving. Able to understand me what I am saying, Francis? Yes. For example, if you are actually going to a market, right, to do shopping, right, what things that you buy from the market or while shopping, you will actually have to carry those things in plastics or bags when you are going back home. Right. So in that case, that is the very much that is the exactly the same way C++ actually works. When you are actually getting access to data from files or trying to get data from files, you will actually need something to actually hold those data. So for that we will be using variables. If you are getting a name from a file, if you are retrieving a what do you call this, a name from a file, then obviously you will be using a string variable to store your data. If you are actually getting a what do you call this, an integer from a file, if you are actually getting an integer from a file, then obviously you will be using a integer variable to actually store the data that you are getting from the file, right? Likewise, the type of data that you get from a particular file, right, it should actually correspond to what to the variable, to the data type of the variable. If it's a string data type, then it will only be able to store string variables or string values that you are getting from the file, right? If you are getting integer values, then you will only be able to store them in integer variables. And likewise, characters, double values, and so on. You're able to get me saying what I'm saying, Francis? Very nice. So, so when you are actually dealing with reading and writing to files, there are three libraries that we actually come across. Or there's actually one library that we come across, but there are three specific commands that help you to actually access, actually do reading and writing to files. And these three things are your if string, off stream, and f stream, right? So when we are talking about if stream, then what does that mean? If you are only reading a data from a file, if you are only reading a data and doing nothing else, then you will use if stream, right, to input text from plain text files. So input in that case would be like getting a data from, or like input in this context is used to define what we are saying reading. In this case, let's say if string for input from plain text file. It means that you will use if stream when you are reading from text files, right? When do we use off stream? You will use off stream when you are actually trying to use your C++ programming, or not actually C++, your programming skills or programming, if you are when you are using programming to actually input into another file. See, example, you are using your C++ program to actually write to a Word document maybe. So in that case, you will use off stream, right? So when do we use is f stream? F stream is actually used when you are doing both input and output travel. So if you are actually reading the data from a file, manipulating it, and then writing it back into that file, then you will use f stream. You're able to understand what I'm saying, Francis? Okay, nice. So do you have any questions so far? Yes, you do. Yes. So what would you like to ask before we move on? Okay. Why not we have a look at the next slide, right? Okay. So that means each different text has different text. Yeah, it's more about that means each different text has different variables. It's actually more about what you are getting from a file and where you are storing. Like I was saying, that if you are reading an integer value, then you will only be able to store it in an integer variable. You will not be able to store an integer value in a string variable or a character variable. That would be actually a syntax error. Likewise, if you are trying to that is only the case when you are actually reading. That that does not apply when you are actually writing to a file, right? When you are actually writing to a file, that does not actually, it's like, because it's a, you're writing to a document, you're writing to a file will be able to store more than one kind of data at one time, right? So it doesn't, so in that case, we are not specifying the container, or let's say, if you are saying, if you are writing to a file, if you are entering a integer variable, right, into another file, if you want to write it to another file in integer variable, then you will not be specifying a integer variable to actually store that data there, because it's directly going to the file, right? But when we are reading from a file, then we need an integer variable, because we are getting the data from a file, right? And we do not have a place to store it. When we are in our programming terms, we do not have a place to store it when we are getting it from the file. So in order to actually cater for that, we are providing a variable of the same data type to actually store that, so that we can use it in our program. Right? So if you want, like, we are going to use that data in our program, that is why we are storing in the same data type variable. Right? For example, if we are getting, let's say, reading number 5, or let's say, let's say if our question is to read a number from a file and add 1 to that number, right? Then what are we going to do actually there? We are since we are reading a number from a file, let's say we are reading an integer value, then we will read that value and then we are going to store it in a integer variable, right? Of, let's say, int num. Let's say we are going to store in the variable num, which is a data type of int, right? And then we are going to add 1 to that number. Then we are going to say num plus 1 after we have read. So you see, we are going to actually use that variable. That is why we are placing it in this what do you call this, corresponding data type, of like of the same data type. Right? Now, okay. Hello Sarah, welcome you to this session. Can I have your student ID for okay, Sarah, are you here for the cs111 mentoring session, right? Oh, sorry, cs111. So sorry about that. cs111. Yeah. So can I have your student ID for attendance purpose, please? Thank you very much. So as we were discussing, we were actually discussing on file input and output, right? Reading and writing from a file, and then we have come to this part, right? So if you see this, so if you see this, what do you call this slide, right? Working with file streams, right? So this actually basically explains how your C++ program is going to be structured when you are reading and writing to a file, right? Now, if you are actually, if your intention is to actually read and or read or from a file, right? Then you would actually need a standard library, right? You will need a library, and that library is actually this one. That library is actually this one. This is the library. So include upstream, right? If you include that library, that will actually allow you, or that will actually that actually contains the implementation for this if stream here, right? This .open file here, right? These are the commands that are actually defined inside this what do you call this fstream library. So if you are defining that library at the top of your program, then only you will be able to use this ifstream and offstream file there, or things there, right? Now if you see, I want you to actually focus on the coding there, right? So include fstream there. So what does it actually say? Include the header when you use file streams. So as I was saying, if you are using the file streams, then only you will be actually like if you are reading or writing to a file, then then you will be required to actually include the library there of fstream, right? Now let's say if you are actually want to read from a file, right? If you want to read from a file, then this is how it actually works. You will say ifstream, you will actually say ifstream and infile, right? Now why are we actually saying ifstream infile? Now in this case, it's more like you are using this infile to actually gain access to the file, right? So it is more like a portal. This what do you call it, declaration here is more like a portal, right, to the that will provide you access to the file, right? So you will use this infile to actually access the what do you call this, a document or a file, to actually get the data. You're able to get me, guys? What about you, Francis? Nice. So as I was saying, so this infile is more like a portal. So you will use this portal to actually access the file and get the data, right? Now, so if you look at the writing that is here, it says use ifstream for input, offstream for output, fstream for both input and output, right? So that was actually what we are saying. So if you are actually going to read from a file, or if you are only going to read from a file, then you will use ifstream, right? If you are only going to write to a file, then you will use offstream, right? If you are only going to, or if you are going to do both read and write to a file, then you will have to use fstream that defines both input and output, right? So if you are actually reading from a file, so we would say ifstream infile to say that we are actually using that variable infile to actually read from the file, right? So as I said, that infile is more like a portal there, right? So what happens from there? So since infile is a portal there, we will first have to open the file in order to access the data there, right? We will first have to open up the file, or actually we have to specify which file we want to actually access, right? So that is done by this line. That is actually done by this line. So yeah, so as I was saying, so that is actually specifying from which file we are going to open is actually done by this line. So if you can see, the infile there that we said previously is more like a portal there, is being used to open a particular file, right? And it says infile.open. So .open is a command that specifies which file you are going to open, right? And inside the bracket it says file name .cstr string, right? So what this actually means, this is more, so this slide is more like an example, or what is, it's more like a template. So if we have to actually, let's say read data from this file. Let's say if you are reading data, for example, let's say from a file, let's say data.txt, then we are going to read in this one, I think. In if so, we are going to first define the if stream portal that we are going to use to actually access. So I'll say, let's say in file again, right? So in file, right? And then I'm going to say that. Then after that, I'm going to open up the file. So I'm going to say in file dot open to actually tell that now I'm going to use the portal to open and the name of the file. Now what is the, so that will be, so you will actually be specifying the name of the file inside the bracket, and within that bracket will be your open inverted commas. So you will have this open inverted commas there, and within that you will specify your file name, and the file name would be something like this. If it's file name such as data.txt, right? So data.txt, and then you will end the line there. So that is the example of how you are going to open the file. You will have to specify the name of the file together with the extension. Extension is .txt here, right? Inside the bracket and inside the open inverted commas. So far so good, guys? Any questions at the moment? Okay, very nice. So let us continue. So as I was actually saying, so that is how you're going to actually specify how you're going to access the data, or actually how you're going to actually open the file. Now once we have opened the file, then what do? We can actually retrieve the data from the file, right? And then again we will use the portal, and the portal in this case is in file to actually access the data, right? Now if I have to say, right, so in file dot open, and then inside the bracket we have file name dot cstring. Now we have now successfully opened the file. Alright, now it's left to actually get the data from the file. So you have to actually know what you are actually reading from the file, right? Reason being, once you read the file, you will have to store it in a particular place, and you have to actually know what you are reading and where you are actually storing, right? So let's say if you have opened the file and now you want to actually store, or you are actually, let's say you want to read an integer number from the file, right? So we have a document, let's say, so from that file we have to read a number, right? So we will have to first define an integer variable that is going to store that, what do you call this, that is going to store whatever you are going to read. So what I am actually going to do, I am actually going to define here, I am going to say int name here, or let's say I will initialize it to 0, right, is equal to 0 there, right? So what happens now? If string in file is open the file, then in file.open I've opened the file. Now I'm going to use the compile, or what do you call this, the portal to actually access the data there, right? So I'm going to say int in file asterisk, or what do you call this, greater than sign, right? Now another thing you have to actually note is this greater than sign. This greater than sign when we are actually reading from a file, and this greater than sign when we are actually writing to a file. When we are actually reading from a file, we will use this arrow, right? We will use this arrow, not arrow actually, we will use this, right? We will use this greater than signs to actually gain access to the data and get the data. So you will use two bigger than signs to get the data and store it in the variable that you have actually created, right? So what it actually does is that the total is there, and then two greater than sign, since you are reading from the file, and then is going to store it in this variable here, name. Right, it's going to store it in the variable name. So two different types of data. So it will again have this arrow here, these two arrow, or these two greater than sign. Sorry, I keep making the mistake. So we'll have these two greater than sign to actually denote that you are actually reading. So if you are reading two data, then this data will be read and stored up here. The second data will be read using this, and it will come and store here. Right? So you're able to understand how you're going to read from the data, right? Francis and Sarah? So if you are actually reading from a file, right? If you are actually reading from a file, then you have to keep in mind this greater than signs is actually used to read from a file. You will use that to actually read from the file, right? If you are writing to a file, right? If you are writing something into a file, then you will use this, right? If you are reading, you will use this. If you are writing to a file, then you use this. You will have to see the differences there. If you are reading, then you will use two greater than sign, right? If you are writing to a file, then you will use two less than signs, right? Now I would say, name, comma, in value. Right, so for example, I would say, I am going to say in the value, right, and then I'm going to say, right. So now I have created two variables there, right? So I have created two variables there since I am reading from a file. So since I am reading, so I will get the data. So first thing, let's say we are reading the name. So in file greater than sign, since we are reading, and the name of the variable. So what the compiler is actually going to do is going to get the name from the file and is going to store it in this particular variable, right? So far so good. So it's going to read the name from the file and is going to place it inside that variable there, name, right? After that, it's going to read again the value. So for that, since we are reading again, so that is why we'll be using again greater than sign, since we are reading again. So we'll use the value that will be read there will come and store in this variable. So far so good. Okay, nice. So that is very much how yes, Sarah, you have some. What is stored in the value? Okay, so what is stored in the value? Yeah, so it's a very so it depends on the data type of the value or the variable value, right? If it's a integer, then an integer will be read and stored into that particular variable. If the data type of value is string, then a string will be read and placed inside that value. inside the variable. And if it's a character, then a character will be read and placed inside the variable. Able to get me what I'm saying? Yeah. So it all depends on what is the data type of the variables that you have defined while you are actually reading, right? Now, if you focus on your writing to a file, let's say, so let's focus on the second part, right? Of stream out file. So that is actually used when we are actually writing to a particular file. Right? When we are actually writing to a particular file, then we'll specify that that it's a off stream. So off stream denotes that it's a writing to a file, right? And likewise, we will have this out file as a, what we call this, a pointer. So it's going to get to that file and it's going to write into that file, open up that file so that we can write inside that file, right? Just like we did in the app stream, right? So it's going to say out file.open. So it's going to open up the file, and then inside here you see we are actually specifying the extension of where the document is actually located. Let's say your document, let's say you want to write into a document that is on your desktop, right? You want to write to a file that is on your desktop, right? So the pathway, that you will specify will be from your C drive to your desktop. That will be the part that you will actually specify, right? So that the portal will actually go from the C drive, then it will go to the desktop, and then in the desktop is going to look for that particular file of the name output.txt, and then it's going to open up that file. Now if it's open, then we can write to that file. You able to get what I'm saying? So in order to write to a particular file, you will have to specify the path. If your path is actually correct, then only you will be able to write successfully into that file. Now, once your file has been opened, then what do we actually do? Now your file is open, we can actually write into that file, right? So whatever data you want to actually write into that file, we can actually do that, right? Now, so let's look at this particular line. This particular line reads out file less than signs and name. So as I emphasized earlier, when we are actually writing to a file, right? So when you are actually writing to a file, right, what do we actually do? So as I was saying, this particular sign actually denotes that we are writing to a particular file, right? So that specifies that we are writing to a file. So this is the portal that we have used to open up the document. This is the sign that is specifying that you are going to write into the document. And this value and this variable actually holds the data that you actually want to write to that file. So let's say this particular variable holds my name, Dinesh, right? Holds my name, Dinesh. So when you are specifying this line, so in that particular file output.txt, right, my name will be written there because my name is already stored in this particular variable, right? And then we are still not done. We will still be inputting 3 other things. So first thing that's inputted into the that is written to the file is my name. Then what is written into that file is this space. So this is actually used to like generate some space between the variable or values that you are actually writing into the file. So this will actually insert the space inside the document. So my name and then space, right? And the third value that will be printed there is whatever that is inside this variable. value, right? So far so good, everyone? Any questions? So it very much depends on how many times you are actually going to read or write into a file, into that particular file. So if you, let's say, if you are writing to a file 5 times, you want to write to a file 5 times, then you will use this sign 5 times, right, to actually specify what you are going to input there, what you are actually inputting, right? Okay, Sarah, what happened? I think you are confused. Is it? Confused. So what are you actually confused about, Sarah? Okay. So last line of writing the file. Okay. Ignore this part. Okay. For now, ignore this part. Ignore that part, right? So this particular variable name, right, holds some data, right? Holds some data, right? And this particular variable here holds some data as well, right? So we are in the process of writing to a particular file, right? We want to actually write to a file. So what do we actually do, right? So whatever these variables is like that, when we are actually reading a data, will be, so you're saying, your question is, will be that name from writing to a file with the same name as the reading from a file? No, 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 it's not actually that case. It's not actually that case. It does not actually have to be the same thing. It can be a very different thing. You can read a name from a file, but let's say you can output or write a long sentence into a file. If you are reading an integer from a file, that does not mean that you can only write an integer to a file. You can write a string to a file, anything that you can actually send it into a file. Right? It does not have to be of the same name, or what you call the same data type or same variable. Yeah, exactly. It does not have to be the same variable. It can be any variable. So in file, we are getting the data from a what you call this variable file, and we are storing it into a variable, right? In offstream, when we are writing to a file, we already have a data in the variable, and then we are reversing the property or reversing the process. We have the data in the variable, we are taking out the data from the variable, and we are writing to the file. We are doing the opposite of what we are reading, right? Able to get what I'm saying? Okay. Use your, right? Use it now. As I said earlier, that this thing is actually called your portal, more like a portal. So you specifically open up that portal to actually read or write or gain access to the file. Once you have actually, oh, right, so we have actually opened up the portal here, right, somewhere here. We have opened up the document here using this open to actually gain access to the file. So once we have actually completed processing the data or accessing or writing or reading from the file, then we would actually need to close them. So we would actually say something like this: entire dot close. to actually close the portal and to close the document. Or you can say out underscore file dot close. Right? So if you are opening the document, then at the end you have to know that you will have to close that document or close that file using that. You will have to specify that. And otherwise you will be getting a syntax error. Right? So far so good? You are able to understand? Okay. So now let us continue. So far actually all this while I was actually talking about reading one name, one number, just one variable. Things that can be stored in one particular variable. Right? So there are cases when we are actually where we actually might need to read one whole line, one whole sentence, right? Then what do we do in that case? For that, we have this getLine function, right? For that, we have this getLine function. So what is this getLine function actually used for? This getLine function does the exactly same thing as we discussed in this previous slide. It actually does the same thing, reading from a file or writing to a file. Or actually it's more like reading from a file, right? It's going to read from a file. But instead of reading one variable, it's going to read one whole line. Right? Able to get what I'm saying? Right. So you are going to use that getLine function to actually read the whole line. Right? Now, how are you, so for that there are some specifications that we have to provide in order, because there might be a case a file might not always have just one line. A file might not always have just one word, right? A document has more than one line, 2 pages, 3 pages, more than 50 lines of text, right? So we have to actually, so when we are actually specifying that we have to read a line, when we are specifying that we are reading a line, and we have to also specify that which line we are actually reading. We have to specify which line we want to read. The getLine function will actually tell you that we are going to read a line, but which line we have to specify that also. Right? So in order to do that, we are going to do something like this. So again, when we are using this in file is again, as I was saying, your portal, your access to the document. So that stream is actually providing you the document. What do you call this? Opening up the document, right, to give you access to the file. Right? Now, and this particular line, this variable especially specifies which line you are going to read. You're able to get me? And where does that in file come from? That in file is actually coming from here. This is the in file. Coming from here. Yeah, it does. Right? It does read the something like that. It does like an array stores more than one value at one time. So it's like it's getting the whole data, right, into just one line. Is going to get it using the getLine function. So stops at, so it's like the place where, so there's another condition. There's another condition to that. So you will be able to specify which line you want to read, right, and from which document you want to read. But how will you know that where that particular line is going to end? That is actually specified by this. So the line will end at the place where you have this next line, /n. So /n would actually mean move to the next line. So wherever the compiler is going to read this, is going to read till there, is going to stop there. Right? So what it does, stops at n, takes it from the stream and throws it away, or throws it away. It's more like it does not discard it, it's more like uses it. It does not store it in a string, right? It does not store it into a string, but you can directly use to output that, right? Now let's move on to the next slide. So this was actually reading from the whole line, right? Now it's like writing text output. So as I was saying, all this while I have been discussing, you use the operator greater than 2 greater than signs to send strings and numbers to the output stream. So output stream is this output stream is actually referring to your C++ output screen, your black screen that you are going to output there. Right? That's what it's actually doing. So your C++ compiler, when you compile a C++ program, that is your output stream. So that's what it is doing, is directing, sending your output to the output stream there. So off stream, right? So off stream, this actually denotes that you are going to read from a file, and out file.open, this is somewhat what we have already discussed in the previous slide. So another thing, so what we are going to discuss now is all about when are we going to stop. I've actually told you that we will be using, I've already told you the syntax of how we're going to read the data. But we also have to specify when will that portal stop reading from the data. You have to specify that. Able to get what I'm saying? Right? Guys, you are able to understand what I'm saying? Yeah. So we will actually have to specify, or we have to actually tell the compiler when it has to actually stop reading. When it has to actually stop reading. Right? So one of those ways is like doing this. If you infile.fail. So what does infile.fail mean? What do you think infile.fail actually means there? Exactly. So infile.fail actually means there, if your portal was not able to open the file, then what do you do? So if you're not able to open the file, then you will not be able to access the data. So straight away is going to return 0. Yeah, return 0, end the program. Right? So if that is the case, then another thing you have to note that these variables that we are actually having here are actually created in the int main. So if you are not able to actually open the file, then you will not be able to execute this command successfully. You will not be able to write into that file. Because out file means here that you are going to write to the particular file, right? Now, so far so good, guys? Okay, very good. So next question is, so we have this particular question. Write a C++ program to write number 1 to 100 into a data file node. So we are going node.txt. So we are going to create a file nodes.txt, right? So we have to actually access that particular file, and then we have to actually write from numbers 1 to 100. So how do you think that is actually going to work? What do you think we should use there? An if statement, an off statement, or just like normally write out file and then less than sign and then 1, 2, 3 and then till 100? Will that be possible? No. So what do you suggest we use there? We will be using there to write something, write from numbers 1 to 100 into the notes to text. So in this case, we can actually note that we know how many times we have to write to a particular file, right? So we can actually specify so that using a loop, we can actually use a for loop to output into a file, right? How we are going to do that? Let's have a look. So we have our header here. Okay, since we are using if stream or off stream, so we have to specify the library that we will define the off stream, right? And inside the int main, we have our off stream. We have off stream because we are outputting into a document, right? And then we have the f out to actually specify. It's more like a portal there is going to use to connect to the document, right? So we are now using the portal to actually open the document. So once we are done there, so we have opened this particular document here, right? And then we are going to use this for loop to write. And then after we have done writing to the file, then we are going to say fr.close. Any questions so far? The main thing you have to actually note here is how you are actually going to write to the particular file. And how you are going to do that is using this. Since we are writing to a particular file, so we will need the name of that portal name, right? F out, then 2 less than signs, and then we are writing I. I is coming from the condition of the for loop. So if you are able to understand how your for loop actually working, then you will be able to understand this. Right? So far so good. Any questions before we end our session here? Okay. So thank you for coming or joining me into this session. Right? I hope I was very loud and clear in helping you out. Right? So if you do have any questions, then I'm writing my email address, student ID here. You will be able to email me here into the student ID, right? This is for right. So until next week, I hope you have a great week. Right? Enjoy your week, and if you do have any questions, please do email me. And also note that we are also having mentoring session, past session for cs111. So if you are in Lodala, then my session, cs111 session, is on Thursday, what do you call this, 1 to 2 at PM at the FSTE SLS. So if you are in uni, then please do email me or come to this SLSJ to join my session for cs111. And we'll be doing pretty much the same thing here.